Hello, my name is Stigma, and today I'll be making an intermediate guide for Smite. This is going to be assuming that you've played some games, you're comfortable with some gods, maybe you started playing Conquest now, you've probably watched a Conquest guide or some streamers just playing in the role that you're queuing in. So you kind of have an idea of what you're supposed to do, but maybe when you win a game, you don't really know why you win, or you're falling behind and you're not sure why, or you could have gotten a lead and you don't know why. And hopefully, this will just help you kind of figure those things out and try to just be better at Smite. So, I'm going to start with farming because that's probably something that you're going to be doing the most in Smite. So here I am on the Conquest map, and I'm just going to clear the wave. And you'll see how all these camps are up. I could go and auto-attack the bastions and whatnot, but it's kind of a waste because the bastions don't go away. They're always there throughout the game. And I can't do anything in lane right now. So it's more efficient for me to just go farm camps. And the bastions never go away. So you can just clear them later on in the game, and the reward early game isn't like that big of a deal. Just as long as while you're clearing those camps, you're trying to miss as little minions from your wave as possible. Like, you don't want to miss minions to get a camp, but at the same time, if there are camps up, you want to go farm them. And the same thing, when you're shoving minions into your opponent's tower, if your opponent, say, recalls or just rotates to another lane, you're actually denying them farm because the tower is going to kill the minions. And that's actually one way that I like to think of a tower's health. I like to think of a tower's health as how many minions I've denied from my opponent. So if you're just standing in lane, like auto-attacking a tower, you're kind of just wasting your time when you could be clearing, say, other camps, or maybe even roaming to another lane to try to help your teammates. The next skill I'd like to talk about is recalling. You generally don't want, like, I could recall and get a magic focus right now if I wanted to, if I wanted to go into Spear the Magus. But magic focus doesn't really give me much, and if I recall, I'm gonna miss this entire wave that's coming out. So it's not really worth it. When you're thinking about recalling as well, you also need to think about when your opponent recalls, because if your opponent recalls and you don't, and they've spent their gold, then they're going to have an item advantage on you, whether it's small or large. A good recall, in my opinion, is one where you miss as little farm as possible, so you're not really missing a wave. And when you're getting more than just like a T1 or a T2 isn't terrible, but you could ideally you'd want to finish a full item on a recall. But obviously, if you're forced out of lane and you have to recall, that's a little bit different, because if you're sitting in lane with like 200 HP, you're just going to get dove by the support, the jungler, or whoever. So if you find yourself falling behind in lane, it could just be because you're not recalling correctly and you're losing farm and gold. So on the topic of recalling, chasing kills is something that you should try to avoid doing. As a general rule of thumb for myself personally, I try to avoid chasing a kill for more than about 3 seconds. This is because there's a very good chance that their abilities are going to come off cooldown. If they have a dash, they're just going to dash away. They're probably leading you to their teammates. You're missing farm. A kill is only worth 300 gold. And so it's not like it's good, but if you're missing a lot of farm just to get a kill and then you die afterwards anyways, it's probably not worth it. Not to mention that your opponent is going to have to recall anyways, so you're still taking them off the map even if you don't kill them. This is especially relevant in the early game where respawn times are actually lower than the recall time. So if you kill somebody in the early game, they could actually be back on the map. Like, if you kill somebody and then immediately recall, they could be back on the map before you are. So now that you've gotten a little bit better at Smite, you're going to want to focus on good relic usage. And what I mean by that is sometimes you know you're going to die, so you decide not to use your relic because there's no point. This is a situation here where I have beads up, and I could use beads, but I'm just going to die anyways. I dashed in, it's on cooldown. It was a really bad decision on my part, and I was just going to die, so there's no point using my beads there. So this is a good example of showing you just some regular juking. Notice how I just move back and forth in tune with Ishtar's basic attacks. That's all that juking is, but it really is a skill that takes a lot of getting used to really master. So something important to know and be aware of is that when you move backwards, there's actually a backpedal penalty. So you move slower backwards than you do forwards. So if you're backing away from an enemy and they're just walking straight at you, they're going to catch up to you before you potentially get to safety. So a lot of the times it's better just to run away, like facing away from them, than it is to try to back away. Unless you're trying to like box them or something. But even then, they're probably going to catch you if they play it right. Also, there is a strafing movement penalty as well, although I don't quite think it's as much as the backstep penalty. You also have an auto attack movement speed penalty, so when you're auto attacking, you move slower than when you're just walking normally. So now that you've played a few games and you're getting better with your gods, you should probably turn off auto buy and auto level. You can still use the recommended build paths, and you can also look up some build guides. But whenever you build an item, just try to think about why you're building that item, why it's good on the character that you're playing, or why you might need it against the gods that you're playing against. If you just build the same items every game, then you're not really playing efficiently, and you'll probably lose some of your games just due to your itemization. It's also important to understand the different sort of power spikes. Like, let's say you're playing an ADC in the duo lane, and you build Transcendence, and your opponent builds Bloodforge. Your opponent is going to have a significant advantage over you for a good chunk of the laning phase, because they're going to have the sustain from Bloodforge as well as just the raw power, because until you stack Transcendence, you're not really going to be benefiting from it. It's not really a full item. So they're going to out-sustain you, and they're going to out-damage you. And you just need to be aware of things like that. This is just one example of that sort of thing. But if you're boxing with your opponent and you're thinking, why am I losing this? It could just be that they have a better spike than you do. And as well, since you've started probably learning what some of the gods are doing, anti-heal is very important. If you're playing against a healer, you should pretty much always build some form of anti-heal. So we're just going to go over protections and penetration really quickly. There are two different types of penetration, primarily, and that would be flat pen, which is something like Jotun's Wrath or Brawler's Beatstick, and percent pen, which is like, say, Crusher or Hydra's Lament have percent pen on them. The difference is that flat penetration tends to be better early game, and percent penetration tends to perform better in the late game. To showcase why that is, we're just going to look at Susano's stats really quickly. So let's say I have 10 flat pen from Jotun's Wrath. Susano at level 1, this isn't exactly going to be, like, you're probably not going to have a Jotun's Wrath at level 1, but Jotun's Wrath provides 10 flat pen, so that's almost equivalent to 50% penetration towards Susano's base protections. if he's level 5, it's again, it's like 30% penetration. Just from that 10 pen on Jotun's Wrath. So generally, you'll want to build flat penetration earlier on in the game and try to itemize towards percent penetration later in the game. Flat penetration isn't, it's not bad late game. Like it's still over 10% pen on just Susanna's base stats. If he builds a protection items, it'll start to fall off a little bit, but yeah, just in the early game, you don't really want to build percent pen, or you don't really want to itemize towards percent penetration. But then again, maybe your plan is just to play for late game, in which case you could just try to farm and scale and avoid fighting. And on the topic of penetration, we're going to look at protections as well. So protections are what are going to reduce your incoming damage. Generally, you'll want to build them on tanks, so like warriors or guardians. Sometimes you could build them on a damage dealer in certain situations, but for the most part, especially in the current season, building hybrid isn't too great. Protections alone aren't what make you tanky. It's the combination of protections and health. So if you only build protections, you're not going to be as tanky as you might think you are, especially if your opponent builds a lot of penetration. And just as well, if you only build health, you're not going to be as tanky as you might think you are. It's really about finding a nice balance between health and penetration, as well as the item passives. Like, you don't really want to build items solely for their stats. Stats do play a big part in what you decide to build, but you really want to focus on the passives as well and what you're trying to accomplish by building that item. So now we're going to talk about proper Fire Giant usage. I see a lot of newer players, they understand that Fire Giant is an important objective and they fight for it, but they don't really understand how to use it once they've gotten the actual buff. So in general, the first Fire Giant buff you're going to use to take the towers rather than actually end the game, and that's going to set you up for the second Fire Giant buff, which will actually allow you to siege the Phoenixes and potentially end the game from there. The reason for that is if you just get, say, Fire Giant, like your first Fire Giant, and you just run it up mid, the Titan is going to be extremely difficult for you to kill. Every tower every structure, that is standing adds to the Titan's health pool and protections. So the more towers that you take off the map, the less tanky the enemy Titan is going to be. And also the towers are basically just a static resource. So the towers are a pool of gold for your team that is never going to go away. It's a one-time kind of thing. So taking all the structures on the map and then recalling, going for, say, a Fury, and then setting up for a second Fire Giant is actually, it gives you a huge lead over your opponents. So if you had a lead already to begin with, then that's going to give you an even bigger lead, and it'll make it much easier to just close out the game with the second Fire Giant buff. And the reason I prefer to go from right to left is because the left Phoenix is actually the most valuable one, theoretically, because it's further away from Fire Giant. So when you've got fire minions pushing up the lane, your opponents are going to have to send someone there to push out those fire minions. So if they have someone on the other side of the map, it could potentially turn the Fire Giant fight into a 4v5 in your favor. And, yeah. When you are sieging Phoenixes, I see a lot of teams tend to do like a 1 and 4, so they'll have one person siege a side lane and 4 people in a mid lane, or maybe they'll have a 2-3 split where there's 2 people and 3 in another lane. I don't often see 1-3-1, so that would be 1 in the side lanes, 3 in mid. That one's not, it's not really very popular. I don't see it much, but it is another option as well. And since we're talking about sending people to defend fire minions, split pushing is also very difficult to understand how to do. The concept itself is pretty simple, but understanding when you should do it and why you should do it is actually pretty complex. Apollo is a really good split pusher just due to his ultimate. It makes him extremely safe. Personally, I split push when I'm behind or when my team is losing and we aren't winning team fights. The reason for this is that if you split push a lane, at least one member of the opposing team has to come fight you. And if you are particularly strong, like you have item advantage or level advantage, you could actually end up just killing them. If they have to send someone to stop you from split pushing, then your team can take fights elsewhere, especially if you have a global ultimate such as Apollo's, where you can just ult and then join in the fight and it'll turn it into a 5v4. So that was the intermediate Smite guide. We went over a lot of important topics such as farming, juking, which is dodging abilities, your items and your build paths, and understanding why you're building items, as well as fire giant usage and the difference between flat pen and percent pen. They're all very important concepts to understand, and I hope that in your Smite games you are trying to think about your decisions, your builds, and how you can improve. I hope you enjoyed this guide, and I'll see you next time.